In the shadowed halls of ancient Persepolis, where stone lions guarded gateways to kings' desires, beauty was more than ornament, it was danger draped in silk. Why beauty was deadly in ancient Persia is not a tale of fainting courtesans or poetic seductions. It is a record carved in silence and scar tissue of how physical perfection in a world ruled by divine kingship became a curse. Beneath the grandeur of gold-stitched robes and jasmine-scented courts lay a brutal economy of appearance, where women and sometimes men were plucked from obscurity not for their wisdom or strength, but for the fatal flaw of being too beautiful to ignore. In the court of Darius I, beauty could secure favor, but it also drew the cold gaze of the eunuchs who maintained order behind the veil. In Xerxes' harem, loveliness meant ownership, private, guarded, and ultimately disposable. Behind the translucent curtains of the royal quarters, flesh became politics, and beauty was weaponized by queens and concubines alike. Persian chronicles are scarce, but Greek historians whispered of women who vanished without record, of harem intrigues where perfumes masked poison, and mirror-polished nails hid sharpened minds. This is not a simple narrative of victims, however. Some turned the trap of beauty into a throne, wielding allure as power sharper than the satrap's sword. But even they could not escape the system that consumed them. The same softness that opened the gates to influence often ended in silent execution or public disgrace. To understand why beauty was deadly in ancient Persia is to step into a world where the eye of the king could elevate or destroy, where being seen was as perilous as being touched, and where perfection was not a gift from the gods but a sentence waiting to be carried out. In the Achaemenid Empire, beauty was never merely a personal attribute, it was a statement of order, divinity, and the ruler's control over the world. From the carved bas-reliefs at Persepolis to the intimate rituals of grooming practiced in private chambers, beauty operated as a soft power mechanism that subtly mirrored the empire's ambitions. The construction of beauty, particularly in women, reveals a society obsessed not just with the visual, but with ideals of cleanliness, symmetry, and social decorum. This wasn't a spontaneous aesthetic, it was engineered. Much of what is known about Persian visual ideology comes from the precise, deliberate imagery left in stone. The Apadana reliefs in Persepolis offer no portraits of individual women, but their absence is itself telling. Power, expressed in this masculine-coded, architectural grandeur, required women to be rendered invisible, their beauty carefully veiled, not only in fabric but in ideology. Yet beneath the formal silences, Persian society was deeply preoccupied with how women looked, how their appearance could uphold or unravel a family's honor, how a single well-groomed face might signal purity, prosperity, and lineage. Coroastrianism. The dominant religious framework of the empire amplified these aesthetic codes by linking external beauty with internal purity. The religion's emphasis on Asher truth, order over drudge, lie, chaos, extended into bodily presentation. Cleanliness was sacred. Washing rituals, frequent combing, removal of bodily hair, and the application of scented oils were not just cosmetic habits, but spiritual acts that aligned the individual with divine order. A woman whose body exuded cleanliness and symmetry was believed to embody Asher itself. This was beauty not as pleasure, but as discipline. Girls were trained early in the arts of maintenance. Ancient Persian cosmetic kitsum excavated near Susa and Ecbatana contained traces of natural pigments, coal, and scented resins, pointing to an aesthetic language written in texture. and scent as much as sight. The skin was to be pale and unmarred, the brows arched but soft, and hair, often perfumed and elaborately braided, served as a social index of femininity and status. Greek observers, peering into Persian customs with a mixture of fascination and disdain, noted these grooming habits with ambivalence. Herodotus, though rarely complimentary of the Persians, did not fail to record their effeminate devotion to perfumes and cosmetics. Xenophon, in his Cyropaedia, crafted an almost admiring portrait of Persian refinement, describing how noble, women and men alike, in the Achaemenid Empire, beauty was never merely a personal attribute, it was a statement of order, divinity, and the ruler's control over the world. From the carved bas-reliefs at Persepolis to the intimate rituals of grooming practiced in private chambers, beauty operated as a soft power mechanism that subtly mirrored the empire's ambitions. The construction of beauty, particularly in women, reveals a society obsessed not just with the visual, but with ideals of cleanliness, symmetry, and social decorum. This wasn't a spontaneous aesthetic, it was engineered. Much of what is known about Persian visual ideology comes from the precise, deliberate imagery left in stone. The Apadana reliefs in Persepolis offer no portraits of individual women, but their absence is itself telling. Power, expressed in this masculine-coded, architectural grandeur, required women to be rendered invisible, their beauty carefully veiled, not only in fabric but in ideology. Yet beneath the formal silences, Persian society was deeply preoccupied with how women looked, how their appearance could uphold or unravel a family's honor, how a single well-groomed face might signal purity, prosperity, and lineage. Coroastrianism. The dominant religious framework of the empire amplified these aesthetic codes by linking external beauty with internal purity. The religion's emphasis on Asher truth, order over drudge, lie, chaos, extended into bodily presentation. Cleanliness was sacred. Washing rituals, frequent combing, removal of bodily hair, and the application of scented oils were not just cosmetic habits, but spiritual acts that aligned the individual with divine order. A woman whose body exuded cleanliness and symmetry was believed to embody Asher itself. This was beauty not as pleasure, but as discipline. Girls were trained early in the arts of maintenance. Ancient Persian cosmetic kitsum excavated near Susa and Ecbatana contained traces of natural pigments, kohl, and scented resins, pointing to an aesthetic language written in texture and scent as much as sight. The skin was to be pale and unmarred, the brows arched but soft, and hair, often perfumed and elaborately braided, served as a social index of femininity and status. Greek observers, peering into Persian customs with a mixture of fascination and disdain, noted these grooming habits with ambivalence. Herodotus, though rarely complimentary of the Persians, did not fail to record their effeminate devotion to perfumes and cosmetics. Xenophon, in his Cyropaedia, crafted an almost admiring portrait of Persian refinement, describing how noble, women and men alike bathed, scented, and dressed with meticulous care, believing that personal elegance reflected political strength. While Greek culture admired naturalistic physiques and athleticism, the Persian aesthetic leaned toward refinement, polish, and restraint. This contrast allowed Hellenic writers to frame Persian beauty practices as symbols of decadence, though, secretly, many admired the elegance. Beauty in the Achaemenid court was also a weapon, subtle, strategic, and often political. Royal women, particularly those in the king's harem, were expected to embody the ideal, not only physically, but behaviorally. These women lived sequestered lives, their bodies shrouded and movements restricted, yet their grooming was compulsory. Ancient accounts describe harem women being prepared for presentation to the king with months of ritual bathing, perfuming, and skin treatments. The body became a shrine to the empire's taste. What complicates the image is that while Persian public architecture erased women from the visible order, the private realm of the palace was full of them, manicured, dressed in layers of embroidered fabrics, adorned with gold jewelry, and kept in carefully maintained quarters. They were at once honored and controlled. Their beauty was not theirs to express, but to serve, a mirror reflecting the power of the male sovereign. And yet, these women, particularly royal wives and high-ranking concubines, wielded influence through their appearance, their proximity to the king, and the favor that beauty might win, even outside the royal sphere. Persian women navigated a world where grooming equaled virtue. Sasanian and Achaemenid texts both refer obliquely to the disgrace of unkempt women, equating disordered appearance with disorderly behavior. A woman's body was political. Her scent, her garments, her silence, and her grace, these were signals that she upheld the moral order. Peasant women, though far from the extravagance of the court, adopted scaled-down versions of these practices, using locally available oils, grinding pigments from flowers and minerals, and mimicking elite patterns of decorum. The construction of beauty extended into marriage, where a woman's physical appeal was often her only currency. Marriages were alliances, and appearance became a form of negotiation. Mothers were known to prepare their daughters meticulously before presenting them for betrothal. The ritual of adornment, washing, combing, perfuming, and clothing, both symbolic and pragmatic. It showed the girl's body as ordered, productive, and compliant with divine and social expectations. Beauty here became inheritance, a reflection of the household's discipline. It would be a mistake, however, to read Persian beauty solely through the lens of repression. There is evidence found in textile fragments, in painted ceramics, in burial jewelry that women also found joy and identity in self-presentation. To adorn oneself was to be seen, at least in some form, even if only by one's family, one's husband, or the household gods. In rural areas where the hand of imperial orthodoxy was light, though beauty was rigorously shaped under the Persian ideal, its ultimate purpose within imperial structures found expression in the royal harem, system so deliberately concealed and ritualized that even its shadows spoke of control. The harem was not merely a domestic arrangement for royal pleasure. It was a calculated architecture of power, populated by women selected for their physical appeal and groomed for lives spent within walls they rarely left. To understand this space is to enter the most tightly governed zone of the Achaemenid Palesa realm, where desire, status, and surveillance fused into a soft, yet potent machinery of empire. The physical design of the royal harem reflected its political significance. In Susa, Ecbatana, and Persepolis, palace complexes were designed with internal divisions that layered access based on hierarchy, while most of the surviving stonework and inscriptions focus on ceremonial halls and audience chambers. The more private sectors of the palaces, especially those believed to house women, were located deeper within, buffered by guards, corridors, and labyrinthine layouts. The inaccessibility of these inner sanctums was intentional. Walls did more than enclose. They spoke. They marked the threshold between the world of men and the zone of regulated intimacy. The harem, thus, was a paradox, a place of feminine abundance, yet saturated with restriction, Women did not arrive there freely. Most were not born into this world, but selected for it. Royal concubines could be drawn from noble Persian families, offered as tokens of alliance. Others came as tribute, forcibly taken from conquered territories. Greek, Babylonian, Median, or Egyptian girls chosen for their youth and aesthetic compatibility with Persian standards. These were not random acquisitions, but strategic incorporations. Every body added to the harem carried symbolic weight, a living testament to the king's dominance over distant provinces. The girls entered the system young, sometimes prepubescent. Their identities slowly redefined through rituals of cleansing, renaming, and assimilation. Their pasts were either erased or softened into myths acceptable to the court. Inside life was strictly codified. The women were arranged by rankwiths of noble lineage at the top, favored concubines in the middle, and attendants or entertainers forming the base. Competition was not just inevitable, it was cultivated. Access to the king translated directly into influence, and proximity determined everything from living quarters to the quality of one's clothing and food. Promotions could occur when a woman bore a son, or simply when she gained the king's favor through beauty, cleverness, or compliance, but most lived in waiting. Days passed in ornamentation, instruction in etiquette, music, dance, and the preparation of their appearance, with only the faint hope of being summoned to ensure the sanctity and exclusivity of this female enclave. A peculiar caste of men was embedded within the system, castrated either before puberty or in adolescence. These individuals served as intermediaries between the king's authority and the women's secluded world. They functioned as guards, overseers, and messengers, often wielding significant administrative power within the palace. Their presence was meant to neutralize the threat of male sexuality, preserving the women's status as the king's exclusive domain. But eunuchs, despite their altered status, were anything but powerless. Many became trusted advisors and confidants, managing the logistics of the harem, including surveillance, punishments, and internal rivalries. Their knowledge of the inner court gave them a political leverage that, in some cases, rivaled that of generals or ministers. Yet the notion of surveillance in the harem extended beyond personnel. Space itself was used to monitor. In certain palatial designs, rooms were arranged so that the king could observe the women unseen. Curtains, screens, and balconies allowed for clandestine gaze, reinforcing the idea that even in their solitude, the women were not alone. This panopticon-like environment bred obedience and ritualized silence. The body was always on display, even when no one was watching, or rather, especially when no one was supposed to be watching. Despite the restraints, the harem was not devoid of political agency. A woman who won the king's attention might intervene in decisions, support factions, or manipulate succession through her offspring. Royal mothers, once concubines or wives themselves, held considerable sway, especially when their sons vied for the throne. There are recorded instances in which harem women orchestrated poisonings, forged alliances, or sowed dissent to protect or elevate their children. Though official records remain mute on these details, Greek and Babylonian chroniclers, often hostile to Persia, delighted in recounting tales of feminine intrigue within the court stories of women like a wife of Xerxes I, who allegedly exacted cruel vengeance on rivals within the harem, or Parysatis, mother of Artaxerxes II, whose influence is said to have shaped imperial policies behind the scenes. These stories, whether exaggerated or not, underscore a central truth. While the harem was built to contain desire, It became a crucible where power was not only performed but contested. And the instrument of that contestation was often the body adorned, guarded, commodified, but never entirely silenced. Desire here was not romantic, it was administrative. Who the king slept with could shift court alliances. Who bore his child could threaten stability or fortify a faction. This is where Persian aesthetics, religious morality, and imperial politics merged most intimately and most perilously. Life within these confined spaces was deeply regulated. Women were restricted in their movements, their communication with outsiders nearly non-existent. Leaving the palace was rare, usually reserved for religious ceremonies or public appearances under heavy escort. Even then, they were veiled, their identities concealed beneath layers of fabric and protocol. Their voices were muted by design, their roles reduced in public memory to silent figures of allure. And yet, they lived rich interior lives full of rituals, rivalries, and moments of muted rebellion. Songs were passed among them, perfumes traded, tiny notes smuggled. Some became literate, writing in secret or commissioning poetry from court scribes. Their world, while caged, was not empty, that the threat of punishment, however, loomed constantly. Infractions ranged from disobedience to suspected infidelity, each carrying consequences shaped more by suspicion than proof. Death was rare but not unthinkable. More often, a woman who fell from grace would be demoted, relocated to a less privileged wing, or simply erased from the harem's spoken memory. Her ornaments stripped, her attendants reassigned, she would become a ghost within the very walls where she once flourished. The system preserved itself by ritual erasure. Memory was as tightly policed as movement. Still, there were slivers of resistance. A stolen glance between a woman and a eunuch, a concealed pregnancy. A whispered rumor could unsettle the careful order. The system relied on total control, and even the smallest breach exposed its fragility. In this sense, the architecture of desire was never stable. It was always negotiating between order and entropy, fidelity and fantasy. The memory of these harems lingers not through Persian records, which remain silent, but through the writings of foreign chroniclers. Greek authors in particular were fascinated, often scandalized, by the notion of confined women and effeminate kings. To them, the harem embodied everything decadent and alien about the East, yet their obsession also revealed a strange envy, a recognition of the erotic and symbolic power such structures held. Ctesias, a Greek physician who served in the Persian court, claimed to have glimpsed life inside the harem. His accounts are steeped in dramatization, but they offer tantalizing fragments, gold-threaded garments, veiled intrigues, the soft shuffle of slippers in moonlit halls. Whether accurate or imagined, these accounts shaped the Western conception of Persian power as one rooted in excess, mystery, and feminine submission. What often remains unspoken is how such confinement shaped the psychology of the women inside. To grow up within the harem meant to live under permanent observation. Adolescence was marked not by discovery but by grooming. Womanhood became synonymous with performance. Love, if it existed, was refracted through hierarchy, rarely mutual, and often calculated. For many, the only form of intimacy was with one another, sisterhoods formed in whispered confidences, in shared laments, in the gentle touch of one brushing another's hair. The emotional landscape of the harem was complex, part theatre, part prison, part cloistered court, and as generations passed, the system replicated itself. Mothers trained daughters, eunuchs trained their replacements, and the architecture absorbed, Every change, the Persian harem, far from being a static institution, evolved with each ruler, adapting its rules, its ranks, its rhythms. Yet its core remained: desire controlled, beauty enclosed, power exercised through separation. While the architecture of desire within the Persian harem shaped the lives of countless women in silence. The biblical book of Esther offers a rare narrative in which two such women, Vashti and Esther, emerge from those walls into literary memory. Their beauty both a catalyst and a weapon. Their stories, set in the court of King Xerxes, referred to as Ahasuerus in the text mirror, mythologize and distort real dynamics of Persian court life. Yet even filtered through a theological lens, the Book of Esther captures something essential about the transactional nature of beauty in royal spaces, that it could enthrone as swiftly as it could destroy. Vashti enters the narrative already in power. As queen, she presides over a parallel feast, while Xerxes displays the wealth and glory of his empire to nobles and officials. Her refusal to appear before him summoned, perhaps, to display her beauty before drunken menace, an act cloaked in mystery. The text never reveals her motives, but it does show what beauty demanded: visibility, submission, and spectacle. To be beautiful in the king's court was to be summoned like an ornament, a flourish on the empire's grandeur. Vashti's resistance, whether born of dignity, defiance, or sheer fatigue, challenged this order, and for it she was cast out. Her punishment is swift, and its justification reveals the deeper anxieties of the court. Her disobedience, if left unchecked, might inspire other women. It is not Vashti's beauty that threatens the empire, but her refusal to let that beauty be used. The fear is political, not personal. A single woman's silence becomes contagious, and the court, terrified of disorder, replaces her with another whose appeal is not merely physical but docile. The fall of Vashti sets the stage for a new contest, one that echoes the carefully managed rituals of the Persian harem. A search is ordered across the empire for beautiful virgins, each to undergo a year of purifications, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 with perfumes and cosmetics, before being presented to the king. This ritualized grooming matches what is known from external sources, including Greek accounts and archaeological findings, in which royal women were prepared over long periods to achieve the physical perfection expected at court. Into this system steps Esther, a Jewish orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, whose beauty immediately draws attention. Unlike Vashti, Esther's power lies in her compliance, her quiet grace, her ability to charm without confrontation. She says little, reveals less, and is rewarded. Her Jewish identity remains hidden, and her submission to the harem's protocols positions her for success. When her moment comes, she wins the king's favor, not by protest, but by alignment with the court's expectations. Her beauty is not radical but strategic, and it opens doors Vashti's voice had slammed shut. Esther's rise reveals another layer of how beauty operated in ancient Persian structures, as a pathway to proximity, and through proximity to influence. Once queen, she does not remain a passive ornament. Her intercession to save the Jewish people navigated through a delicate series of banquets, veiled requests, and emotional appeals demonstrates her political acumen. She does not confront the king directly until the moment is carefully staged. Her beauty secures her position, but it is her understanding of timing, tone, and performance that secures her people's survival. In this way, Esther mirrors the most successful harem women, those who learn to translate personal access into structural change. Yet the story's historical plausibility invites scrutiny. Scholars debate whether the Esther narrative reflects an actual event or is a literary fiction grounded in a plausible context. No Persian records mention a queen named Esther or a royal purge of Jews. The name Ahasuerus, used in the Hebrew text, is widely understood to refer to Xerxes I, the same king who ruled during the height of the Achaemenid Empire. His reign did witness lavish spending, grand banquets, and a reputation for temperamental decisions elements that align with the biblical depiction. But while the historical Xerxes had a queen named a mistress, there is no indication that she was ever deposed or replaced. That discrepancy has led some scholars to interpret the Book of Esther not as history, but as a diasporic morality tale, one that retools Persian court culture to explore the tension between assimilation and resistance. Within this reading, Vashti and Esther serve as poles of behavior. One refuses and is erased, the other submits and survives. Yet survival in the Persian court, as previously explored, was never merely a personal affair. It had ripple effects. Esther's choices, fictional or not, reflect the real mechanisms through which beauty could become a lever of political consequence. In Persian terms, Esther's influence would not have gone unnoticed or unregulated. A queen intervening in court politics, especially on behalf of an ethnic or religious minority, would have disrupted the tight choreography of palace life. The Persian elite, particularly the Magi and the imperial bureaucracy, guarded their authority jealously. A queen acting beyond ceremonial roles, especially if foreign or non-Zoroastrian, would have been seen as subversive. The fact that Esther is allowed to reveal her Jewish identity and still retain favor in the narrative points not to realism, but to a redemptive idealism crafted for a marginalized audience. And yet, the themes it explores resonate with what is known of Persian court life. Women, once within the palace, became bound to codes of silence, protocol, and display. Their identities were often subsumed beneath titles and roles, their power restricted to informal channels. Esther's story, in that sense, exposes the cracks in that structure, how a woman's beauty, once weaponized with subtlety and courage, could unravel schemes devised by powerful men. But it also reinforces the price of such power: constant calculation, invisibility until summoned, and the ever-present threat of replacement. Vashti, in contrast, refuses to play. Her beauty becomes irrelevant the moment she withholds it. She vanishes, not just from the court, but from the narrative entirely. No fate is given. She is unpersoned. Her memory exists only as a caution, and this erasure speaks volumes about how beauty, when unaccompanied by compliance, was treated within structures built to exploit it. Her resistance, while brave, is ineffective in that world. It disrupts nothing, saves no one, and triggers a search for someone more malleable. The system adapts. The architecture remains intact. Persian attitudes toward such influence were ambivalent. While the harem was a site of intense control, rulers were often swayed by those closest to them, and this proximity made beauty a dangerous asset. Court chronicles from the later Sasanian period, and even some Achaemenid fragments, suggest that powerful women, especially mothers of kings, could influence succession, diplomacy, and even war. But such influence always rode a knife's edge. It was admired when it served imperial goals and reviled when it appeared personal or emotional. The Persian ideal valued restraint above all. Esther's restraint, carefully modulated, made her acceptable. Vashti's assertiveness, untimely and unmediated, marked her as a threat. This dichotomy between the two women also reveals how beauty was not a stable currency. It had to be constantly proven, refreshed, and shaped to the needs of power. A beautiful woman without influence was decoration. An influential woman without beauty was suspicion incarnate. Only the union of both, carefully managed, allowed for survival. Esther understood this balance. Her beauty opened the door, but it was her mastery of silence and revelation, of presence and disappearance, that allowed her to reshape her fate and that of her people. These stories, preserved and retold across centuries, have contributed to broader archetypes in the Western imagination. Vashti becomes the symbol of feminist refusal, while Esther becomes the archetype of strategic femininity. But in both figures lies the same origin, a system where women were made to serve as ornaments of empire, their worth determined by their ability to embody and sustain the aesthetic expectations of kings. The Book of Esther does not subvert this entirely. It navigates it, exploits it, and within it finds a narrow window for triumph. What remains sobering is that the victory is so rare and so conditional. Esther's triumph depends on her beauty being perfectly timed, her voice perfectly modulated, her identity perfectly hidden until the final moment. There is no space in the Persian court for messy, spontaneous, or flawed femininity. The body must always be polished. The behavior must always be precise. Any deviation risks elimination. This was the environment in which harem women lived, not just fictional ones, but the countless real women whose lives passed in silence behind the palace walls, whose names never entered history, whose beauty served for a time and then was replaced. In that sense, the biblical narrative, while stylized, offers a profound glimpse into how beauty functioned within Persian power. It was never innocent. It was burdened with expectation, filtered through ritual, and yoked to politics. The stories of Vashti and Esther, though filtered through layers of theology and exile, retained the architecture of the harem world, structured, dangerous, and dependent on a woman's ability to read the room before she even entered it. The afterimage of Persian court life, already hazy within Persian sources themselves, became something altogether more vivid and distorted once, refracted through Greek eyes. Greek historians like Herodotus, Ctesias, and later Plutarch found in the veiled interior of the Persian palace not just political intrigue but the perfect canvas for projecting their anxieties and fantasies about the East. The women of the Persian court, barely visible within the empire's own inscriptions, emerged in Greek texts as figures of allure, danger, and grotesque power. Their beauty was always double-edged. It could captivate kings, but it could also maim, poison, and destroy. Through the Greek lens, Persian femininity became not just exotic, but perilous. Central to this narrative was Amastrus, the wife of Xerxes, and mother of Artaxerxes, a woman who, in Herodotus' account, ordered the mutilation of another nobleman's wife out of jealousy. The story is vivid. Amastrus, enraged by a suspected affair between Xerxes and the wife of his brother, supposedly had the woman's breasts, nose, ears, lips, and tongue cut off. Her body then returned to her husband in pieces. Herodotus offers no evidence for the tale, and even he seems aware of its horror. Yet it persists retold, elaborated upon, and used by later writers to symbolize Persian cruelty veiled beneath luxury. What emerges is not a reliable biography, but an allegory, a beautiful queen whose jealousy outpaces reason, whose status gives her the power to mutilate as if she were a man. that such violence is expressed through a woman's body. Both the agents and the victims is significant. Greek writers saw in the Persian harem not only a political curiosity but a space where femininity itself had grown monstrous. The Greek polis idealized moderation, symmetry, and public virtue. The Persian harem, by contrast, was imagined as cloistered, excessive, and indulgent. Beauty within it was not harmonious, but destabilizing, and thus the women who wielded it were framed not as victims of power, but as its perverse administrators. The Greeks did not see passive ornaments behind those veils. They saw witches, seductresses, poisoners, ctesias. A Greek physician who served at the Persian court offers further elaborations. His Persica, now largely lost but preserved in fragments, through other authors, presents a gallery of court women whose influence bleeds into every aspect of royal decision-making. Phidemia, for instance, is named as one of Darius I's wives chosen for her beauty and for being the daughter of a noble house. Ctesias claims she was instrumental in political betrayals and palace intrigues, often driven by jealousy or competition with rival women. In these accounts, women's bodies serve both as currency and as battlegrounds. Their beauty allows them entry, but their continued presence depends on manipulation, and their downfall is almost always written in blood, even when not physically violent. The women in these narratives are rarely portrayed as benign. They are cunning, calculating, driven by personal motives in a world supposedly ruled by divine kings. This too reflects Greek discomfort, not just with Persian customs, but with their own fascination. To imagine the Persian queen not as a passive recipient of the king's affection, but as someone capable of shaping policy through seduction or murder, was both thrilling and unnerving. It challenged the boundary between public virtue and private vice, and it suggested that in Persia, the private realm had overtaken the public entirely. But these portrayals were not born in a vacuum. They were shaped by military conflict, cultural rivalry, and the need to other the East in order to affirm Greek identity. The beauty of Persian women, when described, was never neutral. It was always eroticized fabrics, scented skin, elaborate jewelry, and always connected to danger. The Greeks saw in that aesthetic a softness they associated with decadence, a softness they believed had made Persian men weak, effeminate, and vulnerable to defeat. To describe the harem was to describe, indirectly, the reason Persia fell to Alexander: too much perfume, too many women, too little virility. That these images have endured is telling. They did not merely shape Western conceptions of Persia. They also shaped how femininity and foreignness became entangled in the Western imagination. The Oriental woman, veiled, dangerous, sexually potent, was born here in these accounts. Her beauty is both her power and her curse. She cannot be trusted because her allure is too strong, her loyalties too fluid. She exists not to act, but to entice others into action, often destruction, yet buried beneath the caricature. There are fragments that reflect genuine tensions within Persian court life. The idea that beauty could wield real influence, that court women were active players in politics, aligns with what little we know from other sources. The Greek mistake, or perhaps their deliberate distortion, was in framing that influence as inherently malevolent. They could not imagine feminine power without corruption. Beauty, in their accounts, did not inspire virtue but seduction, not wisdom but vengeance. There is a kind of desperation in this lens, a way in which Greek writers tried to make sense of Persian dominance not through military or administrative excellence, but through moral decay. Persia's vastness was attributed not to efficient governance, but to sorcery and feminine intrigue. Its rulers were not disciplined strategists, but pampered despots, lost in silken chambers. Their downfall, when it came, could be interpreted not as the result of superior Greek tactics, but as the inevitable collapse of an empire too enamored with its own pleasure. In this worldview, Persian beauty, especially in women, was not a symbol of culture but of weakness. And yet, even as they vilified it, Greek authors could not look away. The veils, the jewels, the elaborate rituals of the Persian harem became objects of fantasy. They populated plays, poems, and later philosophical dialogues. By the Hellenistic period, Alexander's successors adopted many Persian customs, including court dress and female seclusion. The seductive horror of the East had become part of the West. Greek condemnation blurred into imitation. What began as critique morphed into aspiration. Still, the stories persisted of queens flaying rivals, of concubines orchestrating wars, of beauty used like a knife. Whether these stories were ever true mattered less than the meanings they accrued. In these retellings, Persian women were not just historical figures, they were cautionary tales. They warned of what happened when beauty was not contained, when desire moved without rules. And in doing so, they revealed more about the tellers than the subjects. Because if Persian beauty was truly so dangerous, so chaotic, so corrupting, why did the Greeks return to it again and again? Why did they record its scents, its silks, its curves? Why did they remember the names of women who, in Persian records, barely existed? The answer perhaps lies in the very anxiety they sought to suppress, that power and beauty were not separate, that the soft could command the hard, that empire could be undone not by sword but by glance. The question of who truly held power inside the court among the veils and silks, behind the lattice work of whispered commands and perfumed silence, finds no easy answer. Yet while kings sat on thrones and women vied for favor in the inner chambers, it was often the eunuchs who moved between both worlds with quiet, devastating precision. They were not born to rule, yet they shaped succession. They owned no wives, yet controlled the futures of the most desirable women. They were mutilated, yet powerful, silent by design, yet constantly speaking in hushed corridors and behind closed doors. Their role was not merely to protect or serve, but to mediate and manipulate us, especially when beauty was at stake. The creation of eunuchs was a process of brutal transformation, often inflicted in youth, either as punishment, tribute, or calculated grooming for service. Stripped of their ability to father children, they were considered safe enough to enter the sacred space of the harem. Yet their political potency only grew with proximity. They came to understand the dynamics of desire more intimately than anyone else in the palace. They watched as women aged out of favor, as rivalries bloomed beneath the surface of carefully rehearsed smiles, as a single evening's dalliance could elevate a concubine to queen. Their knowledge was encyclopedic and personal. Had been summoned, who had fallen ill, who wore which jewels at which banquet, who cried silently behind embroidered screens, and they weaponized that knowledge. Among these figures, few cast as long a shadow as Pergoas, a Persian court eunuch, whose name, unlike those of the women he managed, survived. Active during the final years of the Achaemenid Empire and into the court of Alexander the Great, Pergoas became synonymous with court manipulation and intimate power. Greek sources, particularly Curtius Rufus and Diodorus, portray him not simply as a servant, but as a political force capable of elevating kings and orchestrating deaths. Whether these accounts are entirely accurate or steeped in the same Orientalist fascination that colored earlier Greek narratives, they make one thing clear: beauty was currency, and Bagoas was its broker. His rise to prominence occurred under Artaxerxes III, during which he supposedly gained control over court appointments and military promotions. More scandalously, Bagoas is said to have orchestrated a series of poisonings that removed rivals to his influence. After Artaxerxes III died allegedly poisoned by Bagoas himself, he installed Arses on the throne, only to kill him too when he failed to submit to Bagoas' control. It was not until Darius III, the last king of the Achaemenid line, resisted Bagoas' manipulations that his power began to falter. Still, even after Persia fell, Bagoas did not. He transferred his loyalty to Alexander the Great and became, according to several sources, both his lover and advisor. This continuity underscores how eunuchs, once embedded in the machinery of power, transcended dynasties. Their unique position intimate with the king, indispensable in managing the harem, and omnipresent in palace life made them fixtures even as regimes crumbled. But their influence was never neutral, because they could not rule in their own name, they ruled through others, and beauty was the lever they most often used. They arranged which women were seen, which remained hidden, which were summoned, and which were sent away. They curated access with the precision of diplomats, understanding that a single encounter between a woman and a king could shift the balance of power across the entire empire. Their ability to manipulate did not stem from brute force, but from the gentle, almost invisible control of rhythm and perception. A concubine might never realize why her invitations to a royal feast stopped arriving. A rival might believe her fall from favor was the result of aging, not the eunuch who whispered half-truths into the king's ear. The power of the eunuch was an orchestration not of music, but of mood, memory, and desire. And within this orchestration, beauty became both a weapon and a wager in this system. The most beautiful women were also the most vulnerable. Their ascendancy depended on the eunuch's favor as much as the king's. A whispered comment, "She seems tired lately," "Her laughter grows shrill," could ruin her career. Conversely, a woman deemed unremarkable could be transformed. With the right preparation, a better dress, a carefully timed encounter, a flattery delivered to the king when his mind was most open to suggestion. The eunuchs saw beauty not as fixed but as malleable, something to be staged, enhanced, and then offered like a rare gem. But this staging had consequences. A woman elevated too quickly might find herself isolated, targeted by jealous rivals, or resented by older consorts. Her success might prompt accusations of witchcraft or deception, and when she fell, it was rarely graceful. Few, if any, were allowed to age in peace. The harem did not permit irrelevance. Once beauty faded or ceased to be useful, women were sometimes reassigned to administrative tasks within the palace, but more often they were simply removed from sight. The eunuchs, having orchestrated their rise, now choreographed their disappearance. Still, the queens and concubines were not always passive. Some learned the language of influence and cultivated relationships with the eunuchs, offering gifts, confidences, and alliances. A favored eunuch might protect a woman from scandal or promote her interests behind closed doors. But these relationships too were transactional. Beauty required maintenance, and maintenance required allies. Within the mirrored chambers and perfumed halls, currency shifted constantly: attention, affection, silence, knowledge. The eunuchs sat at the center of this web. Their value derived from their ability to connect or sever these threads at will. The eunuch's role extended even further when succession crises erupted. Because they controlled access not just to women but to the royal children born of them, they often became the guardians of princes, the tutors of future kings. Their loyalty or betrayal could tip the balance in succession struggles. A queen whose son was next in line relied heavily on eunuchs to protect her child, promote his cause, and silence competing factions. In this way, beauty's final product, offspring, became yet another tool in the eunuch's arsenal. Their proximity to the cradle was just as strategic as their management of the bedchamber. It's telling that in many ancient sources, eunuchs are simultaneously feared and ridiculed. Their masculinity was questioned, their bodies mocked, their desires rendered ambiguous, and yet their influence endured. The contradiction lies in the fear they inspired. They were inside the palace, yet outside the family line, able to touch power without threatening to inherit it. This made them indispensably and dangerous. It also created an environment where manipulation was the only path to self-preservation. Their survival depended on constant calculation. If beauty was a mask, then the eunuch was the costumer, director, and sometimes executioner. Later empires across the East adopted similar systems, each with their own variation of the eunuch figure. But the Persian model, particularly during the Achaemenid and later under Alexander's adaptation, remained influential. It was a system that understood how deeply desire could be shaped, how access could be choreographed, and how beauty, when carefully packaged, could move the wheels of empire more efficiently than war. And yet, for all their power, eunuchs were never entirely safe. They could be purged as swiftly as they purged others. A new king, suspicious of their closeness to the old regime, might exile or execute them. Court factions, resenting their influence, could accuse them of treason or sorcery. Their survival was tied to the invisible threads of favor, and once those snapped, they were left without title, family, or defenders. The same hands that had once held the keys to the king's chambers could be bound behind their back. Still, their imprint lingered long after they were gone. The women they elevated might rise further or fall harder. The kings they guided might win or lose empires. Their names, rarely recorded outside of scandal, lived on only when their manipulation intersected with more public histories. But their work unseen, pervasive, was what kept the palace breathing. They made kings reachable, queens visible, beauty weaponized. In a court that worshipped the appearance of order, they understood the chaos beneath the surface and how to play it, like a harp, within the invisible hands that sculpted power in the Persian court. Few were as subtly effective as the ones that mixed pigments, distilled fragrances, and brushed oils onto flesh. The preparation of beauty was not merely an aesthetic act. It was a strategy. Just as alliances were forged through marriage and politics conducted behind closed doors, so too was the face prepared for war, not with blades or banners, but with coal-lined eyes and skin steeped in rare perfume. It was understood by those within the harem that beauty was not passively inherited. It was manufactured, sharpened, and worn like armor. Every woman who entered the palace's inner sanctum underwent a transformation that began at the surface but extended far deeper. This was not simply about looking appealing to the king. It was about crafting a version of oneself so carefully adorned that it would draw the eye without seeming desperate, inspire desire without threatening hierarchy, and display submission without foregoing individuality. That tension was central. A woman's body was her message, her mirror, her means of survival. And every tool in the cosmetic arsenal carried meaning beyond its immediate sensory effect. Kohl, perhaps the most recognizable of these tools, did more than darken the eyes. It reframed them. Soot and crushed minerals were mixed with oil or resin and applied in sweeping lines that lengthened the gaze and intensified its impact. The effect was mesmerizing eyes ringed in shadow, their whites more luminous by contrast, their movement more expressive. For women in the harem, this became a visual language. A glance might suggest longing, defiance, humor, or boredom. And with their voices often limited in public, their eyes became the vehicle for suggestion. The use of kohl was thus not cosmetic, but communicative. Henna served another layer of meaning. Applied to hands, feet, and hair, it was both decorative and symbolic. It marked transitions, initiation into the harem, preparation for a royal encounter, celebration of status. But more subtly, it acted as a signal of readiness. The hue, depth, and freshness of henna indicated not just grooming, but intent. A woman who darkened her fingertips before a feast did not do so for herself alone. She was announcing that she expected to be seen, and that expectation, if timed with the rhythms of court favor, could shift a reputation or revive a fading interest. Then, there were the perfume scents drawn from rose, myrrh, saffron, frankincense, and rare gums imported from India and Arabia. These were not simply pleasing aromas, they were declarations of access. To wear a certain blend was to declare oneself in favor, to show one had attendance, connections, and resources. The air around a woman became part of her presence, an extension of her personality. She entered a room before she was seen. Her scent lingered long after she left. For the king, whose court was crowded with rivals and echoes, memory became tied not only to words or deeds, but to fragrance. A particular perfume might recall a specific night, a whispered laugh, a silken garment falling to the floor. In that way, women composed themselves not unlike poets, layering meaning and sensation into the smallest of details. The rituals of grooming were elaborate and time-consuming. Baths in oils, hair washed with saffron-infused water, skin softened with pumice and cream, nails tinted with crushed petals. Each step required attendance, knowledge, and precision. It was labor disguised as leisure, and within this labor lay hierarchies. A woman of higher rank might have access to better ingredients, rarer scents, more skilled servants, but even those of lower status learned to maximize what they had, experimenting with mixtures, refining their techniques, and observing how others succeeded or failed. Yet these rituals were not only directed outward, they shaped the inner life as well. To prepare oneself daily in this manner was to assume a kind of psychological readiness, constant self-fashioning, that reinforced one's role in the delicate power dynamics of the court. A woman without makeup was not merely unadorned, she was unarmed. To face the court barefaced was akin to entering battle without shield or sword. The painted face was a projection of intent, a way of saying, I am still here, still valuable, still a presence to be reckoned with. This awareness of the body's symbolic power extended into clothing and posture. The way one sat, walked, or reclined was choreographed with the same care as the application of scent or kohl. A relaxed gesture might suggest confidence, while a lowered gaze hinted at modesty or tactful submission. Every movement could be read, and women learned to read one another in kind, decoding the silent conversations of posture and perfume, gesture and glance. These performances were as strategic as any military campaign. The terrain was visual, the weapons invisible, the victories fleeting but essential. The danger, of course, was that these tools, while empowering in one context, could also become traps. A woman known for her beauty might find it impossible to be seen as anything else. If she aged, if illness or fatigue dulled her appearance, she risked being dismissed entirely. Worse, she might be accused of deception, of using artifice to rise too high. Cosmetic skill, while necessary, was double-edged. Mastery brought attention, but attention brought scrutiny. And scrutiny, in the Persian court, was often fatal. There are echoes of this risk in tales whispered through time, of a woman whose perfumes were too pungent, suggesting she had something to hide, of another whose kohl ran after a night of tears, and was ridiculed for revealing emotion. Beauty, though desired, had to appear effortless. The labor behind it had to remain invisible. A smear of pigment, a wrinkle unmasked, could destroy a carefully cultivated image. This was not vanity. It was high-stakes theater. The preparation of beauty thus became a deeply internalized discipline, where the face was not only a canvas, but a performance, and the body a stage. What emerged was a culture where the most intimate acts, bathing, braiding, blending, oil, were, in fact, public ones, practiced not only for the self, but for an ever-watching hierarchy. In this context, beauty rituals became rituals of control. They allowed women a sense of agency within confinement. To choose one's palette, to design one's scent, was to assert identity in an environment that tried constantly to subsume it, even in silence. A woman could speak volumes through her presentation. A change in perfume might signify mourning or seduction. The absence of adornment might be a protest or an appeal for pity. Those who understood these codes could wield them to great effect, and those who didn't, they faded, unnoticed, untouched. Their beauty wasted not for lack of raw appeal, but for lack of strategy. That is the final irony in this form of warfare. It was never about being the most beautiful, but about being the most deliberate. The tools were available to many, but the wisdom to use them properly belonged to few. And just as the eunuchs curated access and the harem molded hierarchy, it was these rituals, silent, scented, shimmering, that gave the women of the court their sharpest weapons. They fought not for territory but for attention, not for power but for nearness to it, and they did so with brushes and bottles, color and scent, every morning anew. But even the most carefully painted face could not survive the turn of a ruler's glance, or the closing of a chamber door behind which names stopped being spoken. If beauty was a strategy, it was also a liability, one whose currency could expire without warning. For some women, their presence in the palace halls echoed with perfume and whispers, a breath away from power. And then, suddenly, nothing. No records, no epitaphs, no continued mention in the annals of kings. Their names, once repeated by poets, recorded by scribes, or sung at banquets, dissolved into state silence. This vanishing was not accidental. It was practiced, perfected, and often deliberate. Within the Persian court, there was no exile more complete than erasure. It is the aftermath of cosmetic warfare that reveals its sharpest truths, that the body once treated as ornament, once weaponized through scent and shimmer, could be erased, as cleanly as a painted eyelid wiped away with oil. Not all disappearances came with drama. Some were quiet, gradual, barely registered until it became clear they had ceased to be present. Others came swiftly after scandal, a single misstep, or a king's boredom. And yet what they all shared was the certainty that beauty alone could not guarantee safety. Once its purpose had been fulfilled, or worse, once it had grown to a pivot, became dangerous. This fate met many women whose only mistake was being seen too brightly for too long. The court had little tolerance for prolonged radiance. Illumination was expected to flicker, to pass from one face to another, from one figure to the next. To hold the king's gaze too long was to invite resentment from eunuchs, rivals, advisors, even the king himself. And those who failed to fade at the appropriate time were often made to vanish entirely. One figure who escapes this fate, at least partially, is Atossa, daughter of Cyrus the Great and wife of both Cambyses II and Darius I. Her presence in the historical record is rare for a Persian woman, yet it is layered with contradiction. On one hand, she appears as a pivotal figure, royal by birth, politically savvy, and a queen whose marriage to Darius helped consolidate legitimacy after a contentious succession. According to Herodotus, Atossa wielded real influence, possibly encouraging Darius's campaign into Greece. She bore Xerxes' eye, placing her in a position of dynastic significance. And yet for all this, she too retreats from the historical scene after her early prominence. Her voice, her thoughts, her later years gone, what is preserved of Atossa reflects not her desires but her utility. She exists as a node of power, a mother of kings, a vessel of royal blood. There are no Persian records quoting her, no letters, no reflections. Her beauty, if noted at all, is mentioned through Greek interpretations, which often lean toward stylization rather than realism. That someone of such stature could fade so thoroughly suggests the mechanism was not just personal, but systemic. Even queens could be silenced when their roles were fulfilled. The silence that swallows Atossa after Xerxes' ascension is louder than any public dismissal. It is not that she was unimportant, it is that her continued importance was inconvenient. This kind of curated forgetting appears again and again. The court permitted women to rise only within strict bounds. They could be radiant, seductive, strategic as long as they remained contained. But the moment beauty turned into influence that extended beyond the king's private interest, the risk escalated. A woman who could manipulate the monarch became a threat to others in the court, particularly those with their own designs on succession, policy, or wealth. She was not removed openly. That would raise questions. Instead, she was written out. Her name omitted from public inscriptions. Her likeness never carved into stone. Her lineage referenced without reference to her. Silence, in this context, became the ultimate punishment. Unlike physical exile, which could be traced or reversed, erasure was absolute. There were no records to recover, no evidence to challenge. The woman who once stirred envy or awe became little more than rumor, a name remembered, an anecdote avoided. And in a culture that prized memory as a form of immortality, this was a form of death more final than the physical. Some of these disappearances may have been assisted by the eunuchs themselves. After all, they controlled not only physical access to the women, but also information flow. A woman fallen from favor might find her letters undelivered, her allies discredited, her narrative dismantled from within. Eunuchs could remove her from the king's awareness, just as they had once placed her there. They might praise her successor in passing, whisper questions about her health, suggest she had grown withdrawn or difficult. The king, surrounded by curated reality, might forget her even before she was gone. At times, the process was more formal. In rare cases, where a woman's behavior was deemed politically dangerous, interfering in succession, favoring a rival prince, engaging in rumored plots, she might be confined or reassigned to a religious post. Such appointments, while outwardly respectable, were often a kind of burial in life. A woman in a temple could no longer act in court politics, no longer attract the gaze of power. Her beauty was sanctified into irrelevance. She became holy, and therefore untouchable, not with reverence, but with isolation. And yet, even in erasure, fragments remained. A servant might speak her name in hushed tones. A foreign diplomat might record a rumor. A Greek historian, years later, might immortalize her in stylized fashion, turning her into a cautionary tale or a tragic heroine. These echoes, imperfect, filtered, often unfair, all that survive of many whose bodies once shaped empires. Their beauty, so carefully curated, so publicly adored, becomes ghostly in retrospect, felt but not seen. The very thing that elevated them ultimately rendered them unrecordable. Power tolerated them only when they were temporary. What is most striking in these vanishings is how effective they were. Modern historians struggle to identify the names of many royal women, even queens. Their lives were lived in palaces larger than cities, yet the documents that remain often speak of them obliquely. The mother of the king, the favorite concubine, a woman of surpassing beauty. Their identities are collapsed into function. Their fates, when not sealed in stone or buried beneath royal propaganda, drift into obscurity. And this obscurity was not a failure of the recorded, was its purpose. The Persian state, so refined in its rituals and symbols, understood that beauty, when unchecked, could become a source of instability. A woman who commanded attention outside, her designated role upset the choreography of power. She created uncertainty in a world obsessed with control. And so the tools of disappearance were not improvised, but institutional. They began with silence. No announcements were made. No tombs were built. The woman who was once bathed in oils and dressed in silks now lived in shadow, if she lived at all. Even the memory of her could be dangerous. Should a later queen rise to similar prominence, whispers of her predecessor might resurface. Warnings in the corridors, reminders of how influence becomes fatal when it forgets to be invisible. The court learned from its ghosts, and the ghosts multiplied. In time, the lines between real women and legends blurred. Atossa became a symbol. Amastris, distorted through Greek tales, became mythologized into monstrosity. Other names, Parasatis, Statra, surfaced in fragments, sometimes in contradictory roles. Victims, power brokers, traitors, saints, all filtered through male narration, all shaped by the agendas of those who survived them. Rarely, if ever, did they speak for themselves. And so, when we ask what happened to the women of the Persian court, the ones whose beauty shifted history, the answer lies not only in absence, but in design. They did not merely fall from favor. They were removed from memory. Their silence was cultivated, their erasure engineered, not as punishment alone, but as protocol. The system could not function otherwise. To let a woman remain visible after her beauty had faded, or after her influence had grown too sharp, was to allow instability to bloom. And for an empire that prized order above all, that risk was unacceptable. Within the glittering shadows of the Persian court, where beauty was both shield and sword, the stakes of rivalry were often life and death. Women who rose to favor were embraced with lavish gifts and privileges, yet their very ascendancy planted seeds of danger. The intoxicating allure of proximity to the king came with an unspoken clause: when beauty no longer served the empire's intricate power balance, it could become a death sentence. Poison, betrayal, and executions were the grim currencies by which fragile status was but lost. Stories of such fatal intrigue weave through Persian history and legend with a persistent, haunting thread. The royal harem, a space of strict hierarchy and seclusion, was also an arena of volatile competition. Rival factions formed, alliances shifted, and accusations of treachery abounded. What outsiders perceived as a domain of passive luxury was, in reality, a battlefield where the stakes extended far beyond personal survival. They shaped succession, policy, and the very fate of the empire. One of the most notorious tales is that of a masterous wife of Xerxes I, whose jealous wrath allegedly led to horrific mutilations. While some accounts exaggerate or mythologize these acts, the core truth that jealousy within the harem could erupt into deadly violence is undisputed. Such violence was not merely personal, but political. Each favored woman represented a faction's influence. To remove her was to weaken that faction, to reassert dominance. In this environment, even minor slights could escalate into lethal plots. The use of poison as a tool of assassination within the harem is well attested, both in Persian sources and through Greek narratives. Though often the line between fact and legend blurs, poison was a weapon suited to the secretive nature of palace life. It could be administered subtly through food, drink, ointments and leave no immediate suspicion. The inability to openly confront rivals necessitated such methods, and servants, who controlled access to the king and his consorts, often acted as intermediaries or conspirators in these plots, their loyalties shifting with the tides of favor. Bagoas, the infamous eunuch introduced earlier, reportedly orchestrated several poisonings to consolidate his power. His role illustrates how beauty and rivalry intersected with broader political machinations. The women whose favor he brokered could rise or fall based on his decisions. Their lives often hung by a thread controlled by his will. Through such individuals, the personal and political became inseparable, and the quest for beauty became entwined with survival strategies as lethal as any battlefield. Beyond the eunuchs, rival women themselves sometimes became executors of deadly schemes. Competition over the king's affection was not simply a matter of vanity, but of political leverage. A woman with the king's ear could advance her family, influence appointments, or even determine military campaigns. This made rivals fierce. Enemies, accusations of witchcraft, adultery, or conspiracy often served as pretexts for eliminating competitors. The court was rife with rumors that may have reflected real dangers, feeding a cycle of paranoia and violence. Yet executions were rarely public spectacles. The court preferred discretion to maintain an illusion of harmony and order. A favored woman might suddenly disappear from public view, fall ill under mysterious circumstances, or be sent to a distant estate under the guise of health or religious duty. Such removals prevented scandal and preserved the king's image. Behind the curtains, however, the consequences were brutal. Death, imprisonment, or lifelong confinement awaited many who fell out of favor. The fragility of status meant that women were acutely aware of their precarious positions. Beauty, while a potent asset, was ephemeral and double-edged. Aging, illness, or shifts in political winds could swiftly transform a queen into a target. The pressure to maintain favor was relentless, forcing continuous efforts in appearance, etiquette, and alliance building. Failures could mean loss of privilege or life itself. Historical examples highlight this precarious balance. Statera, daughter of Darius III and wife of Alexander the Great, met a violent end, reportedly at the hands of Roxana, another of Alexander's wives. Though the details are shrouded in the chaos following Alexander's death, the rivalry exemplifies how royal women's fates were intertwined with broader power struggles. Even foreign queens brought into the Persian court faced these lethal dynamics. The consequences extended beyond the individual. Rivalries that culminated in executions often destabilized the court and affected governance. The elimination of powerful consorts could trigger factional infighting or weaken the king's support base. In some cases, entire families rose or fell on the backs of women whose beauty had once secured their place. The harem was thus a microcosm of empire, where personal rivalries had public repercussions. Moreover, these deadly rivalries were not confined to the inner palace walls. They reverberated through the empire's administration and military. Officials loyal to fallen queens could lose influence or be purged. Conversely, new favorites could bring entire networks of allies into prominence. The oscillations of beauties, favor-shaped policies and campaigns, often subtly, but with profound effect. The perilous nature of this environment also bred psychological hardship. Women lived with constant fear, suspicion, and isolation. Trust was a rare commodity. Friendships and alliances were often transactional and fraught with risk. The need for vigilance extended beyond the king's attention to include the watchful eyes of eunuchs, servants, and rival women. This atmosphere of perpetual tension affected not only survival but identity, as women had to mask true emotions behind carefully crafted facades. Despite the dangers, some women navigated these treacherous waters with remarkable skill. They cultivated alliances with powerful eunuchs, courtiers, and even foreign dignitaries. They mastered the arts of persuasion, negotiation, and subtle manipulation. Their beauty was but one element in a broader repertoire of political acumen. Success was never guaranteed, but their stories remind us that Persian royal women were active agents in their fate, not merely victims. These dynamics of rivalry and elimination were not unique to Persia, but their intensity was shaped by the empire's particular blend of secrecy, hierarchy, and centralized power. The architectural design of the harem, with its strict spatial segregation, surveillance, and controlled access, created an environment where intrigue flourished behind impenetrable walls. The isolation bred suspicion, while the concentration of power magnified consequences. The intersection of beauty with danger thus reached its peak in the lethal politics of the harem. Where beauty had once opened doors, it could just as easily close them forever. A woman's body was the locus of desire and danger, attraction and elimination. To be beautiful was to be both exalted and endangered. To be favored was to walk a razor's edge between triumph and destruction. These historical realities seeped into later cultural memories, shaping how Persian court women were remembered or feared. They became symbols of fatal allure, figures who wielded beauty as a weapon but paid the highest price. Their stories, part fact and part legend, warn of the costs that came with occupying the spaces between power and desire, visibility and silence. The price of rivalry was not only personal but structural. The system ensured that beauty was a resource, to be managed, controlled, and ultimately expendable. Once a woman's political usefulness waned, the court's mechanisms ensured her removal quietly, efficiently, and often fatally. In this way, Beauty was weaponized not only in seduction, but in elimination. As the empire aged and faced external threats, these internal struggles sometimes weakened it further. The erosion of trust, the cycles of betrayal, and the fragility of alliances created openings for enemies and sowed discord. The harem's deadly politics were not isolated dramas. They intertwined with the empire's fate, reflecting the costs of a system where beauty and power were inseparable but precarious. And yet, amid the dangers, the very persistence of these rivalries reveals a grim truth about human nature and court life. Where power is concentrated, competition intensifies. Beauty, as the most visible currency, naturally becomes the focus of ambition and fear. The Persian court's lethal dance of poison, betrayal, and execution stands as testament to this enduring dynamic world where survival demanded not only beauty but cunning, ruthlessness, and an acceptance of peril. In the shadowy crossroads where Persian empire met Greek ambition, the figure of the seductress took on a new, charged meaning, one that transcended mere beauty and touched upon the dangerous art of espionage. Women who navigated these fraught cultural intersections were often cast simultaneously as objects of desire and suspicion, their allure suspected of masking hidden agendas. It was a volatile role, one that could transform a royal consort or noblewoman into a pawn or a player. In the great game of empire and intelligence, the Persian-Greek encounter was more than military conflict. It was a collision of worldviews, each projecting its fears and fantasies onto the other's women. Greek historians and playwrights, fascinated and horrified by the exoticism of Persia, frequently depicted Persian women not only as embodiments of sumptuous beauty but also as agents of subversion. They were accused of using their charms to seduce and deceive, turning intimacy into political sabotage. This lens shaped how figures such as Roxana and Barsini were remembered, blurring history and myth into a tapestry of intrigue. Roxana, a Bactrian noblewoman who became the wife of Alexander the Great, exemplifies this complex duality. Contemporary sources portray her as both a beautiful, devoted consort and a woman whose loyalties were questioned. Her marriage to Alexander symbolized the merging of East and West, but it also raised fears about divided allegiance. Some Greek accounts suggest she was a seductress who used her position to influence the Macedonian rulers' policies or to protect Persian interests under the guise of marriage. Whether accurate or propagandistic, these portrayals reflect the anxiety over women's roles as conduits of espionage in a time of empire-building. Barsine. Another figure caught between Greek and Persian narratives was the daughter of a Persian nobleman and became the mistress of Alexander after the fall of Persia. Her story is shrouded in ambiguity. Some sources depict her as a willing participant in political machinations, a beauty whose relationship with Alexander was as strategic as it was personal. Others paint her as a victim of circumstances, swept along by the tides of conquest. Yet her presence in Macedonian court life and the rumors that surrounded her underscore how women's beauty and sexuality were inseparable from accusations of spying and betrayal. This suspicion was not unique to Roxana or Barsini. Across the Persian and Greek worlds, women who crossed cultural and political boundaries were often suspected of duplicity. Their ability to move between courts, speak multiple languages, and wield influence through intimate relationships made them both valuable and dangerous. The harem, already a place of secrecy and surveillance, became a hotbed for these anxieties. Stories circulated of concubines who passed secrets, queens who plotted rebellion, and courtesans who served as informants for rival factions or foreign powers. These tales were magnified by the broader cultural narratives that Greeks constructed. About Persia, Persian women were depicted as both irresistible and treacherous, embodying a form of seductive Orientalism that cast them as agents of chaos beneath a veneer of refinement. This framing justified Greek mistrust and served as a cautionary tale about the perils of desire entwined with political power. Conversely, Persian accounts, though more restrained, acknowledged the potential for women to act as intermediaries in diplomacy and intrigue, though always under careful control. The reality was often more nuanced. Women like Roxana and Barsini likely exercised genuine agency within the constraints imposed upon them. Their beauty and status afforded them opportunities to influence decisions, advocate for their families, and navigate the shifting allegiances of conquest and alliance. To label them merely as spies or seductresses oversimplifies a complex interplay of survival, ambition, and cultural negotiation. Yet, the stakes of such accusations were high. Being branded a spy or traitor could mean exile, imprisonment, or death. The use of beauty as a mask for betrayal was a persistent trope that functioned as both political weapon and social control. It limited women's freedom by placing them under constant suspicion, forcing them to prove loyalty while managing expectations of submission and allure. The conflation of sexuality and espionage thus reinforced gendered power dynamics in both Persian and Greek societies. Moreover, these intersections highlight how beauty was politicized beyond the palace walls. It was not only a private asset, but a public liability, subject to the whims of empire and the agendas of conquerors. Women caught between worlds became symbols of the larger conflicts at play between East and West, tradition and conquest, loyalty and subversion. Their bodies and reputations became battlegrounds for cultural identity and imperial control. The narratives of seductress spies also influenced diplomatic relations. Gifts of women were common in royal exchanges, and the potential for these women to act as informants or agents was an open secret. Intelligence gathering through marriage or concubinage was a recognized practice, embedding espionage within the intimate sphere. The presence of foreign-born queens or concubines thus carried strategic weight, complicating alliances and fostering mistrust. This delicate balance was evident in the treatment of women suspected of spying. While outright executions were rare, suspected women might be confined, removed from court, or closely watched by eunuchs and guards. Their movements restricted, conversations monitored. Such measures underscored the persistent fear that beauty, when allied with cunning, could unravel the fabric of empire from within. The mythology that grew around these figures often obscured their realities, but it also reveals how intertwined beauty, sexuality, and political power were in this era. The seductress as spy became a potent archetype, symbol of both fascination and fear. Through this lens, women were not passive ornaments, but active participants in the clandestine struggles that shaped history. Their stories, preserved in fragments and filtered through the biases of male historians, challenge modern readers to reconsider assumptions about agency and victimhood. They invite a deeper understanding of how women navigated the treacherous currents of empire, using beauty as both shield and weapon. In the volatile interface of Greek and Persian worlds, the seductress was as much a political actor as any general or diplomat. Thus, the legacy of these women endures, not only in history, but in the enduring image of beauty entwined with danger. and power. Their lives remind us that to be beautiful in ancient times was to occupy a space fraught with opportunity and risk, where the line between affection and suspicion, loyalty and betrayal was as thin as the veil that separated palace chambers. The powerful influence of royal women in ancient Persia often crystallized most clearly in their role as mothers, women whose beauty was not only admired but harnessed to secure the continuity and legitimacy of dynasties. These mothers of kings embodied a paradox. They were simultaneously symbols of allure and agents of political endurance. Their personal allure intertwined with the bloodlines that shaped empires. The lives of figures such as Casandane and Parysatis illuminate how beauty transcended mere ornamentation to become foundational in Persian royal ideology. Casandane, the beloved wife of Cyrus the Great, stands as an early exemplar of this phenomenon. Though direct historical records are sparse, her legacy is preserved through both Persian tradition and Greek historians, who acknowledge her as a paragon of beauty and virtue. It was through Casandane that Cyrus fathered Cambyses II and Berdesia, Smerdis' heirs who carried forward the empire's expansion. Her death reportedly plunged Cyrus into profound grief, underscoring the depth of her personal and political significance, more than a consort. Casandane was a vital link in the legitimacy of Cyrus's lineage. Her beauty and status lent a divine aura to the royal bloodline, reinforcing the sacred nature of kingship. To be born of such a mother was to inherit not just genetics, but sanctified favor. This concept resonated deeply within the Zoroastrian cosmology of the Achaemenids, where purity and order were intertwined with divine right. Cassandane's role as mother thus extended beyond biology to become a symbol of dynastic purity and sacred continuity. The importance of maternal beauty as a legitimizing force continued and intensified with later queens such as Parysatis, wife of Darius II and mother to Artaxerxes II and Cyrus the Younger. Parysatis emerges in historical accounts as a formidable figure who wielded influence not merely through charm but through political acumen and ruthless strategy. Her beauty, frequently noted by Greek historians, was only the beginning of her power. Through her sons, she shaped succession disputes and court factions, demonstrating how maternal status could translate into tangible authority. Parysatis's life illustrates the dual-edged nature of maternal power. While her beauty enhanced her visibility and status, it was her capacity to maneuver behind the scenes, arranging alliances, orchestrating rivalries, and even sanctioning assassinations that secured her legacy. Her ability to use her maternal position as leverage underscores how the aesthetics of beauty were inseparable from the realities of political survival and influence. In this way, the mother of kings became a central figure in the empire's governance. Even when formally excluded from official rulership, these women had to navigate a delicate balance. They were expected to embody grace and decorum, to be the ideal of feminine virtue, and yet to act decisively when the dynasty's future was at stake. The public face of maternal beauty served as a soft power that could charm courtiers, calm tensions, and inspire loyalty. Behind closed doors, these same women engaged in strategic calculations that could make or break their sons' reigns. This juxtaposition highlights how beauty was not an end in itself, but a conduit for influence. Invested with political significance, the symbolism of maternal beauty also extended to ceremonies and rituals that underscored dynastic legitimacy. Royal mothers often participated in religious observances, public events, and court rituals that reinforced the sacred lineage of their children. Their presence at such moments served as a visual affirmation of continuity, purity, and divine sanction. Portraiture and palace reliefs sometimes included these women, not merely as decorative figures, but as essential nodes in the visual rhetoric of power. Moreover, the cultivation of beauty in these mothers was a deliberate act, supported by attendants, physicians, and advisors who understood its political value. Maintaining youthful appearance and composure was part of the performance required to uphold dynastic image. Aging was a vulnerability not only personal but political, and women like Parysatis took measures to preserve their appearance as a means of sustaining influence. This reality reflects how deeply intertwined physical beauty was with the mechanisms of power. The relationship between maternal beauty and legitimacy also influenced succession politics. A son born of a particularly beautiful and favored queen often enjoyed enhanced claims to the throne. Conversely, offspring of less esteemed consorts might struggle for recognition or be sidelined entirely. The visual and social capital of their mother became a vital factor in court dynamics, affecting alliances, rivalries, and perceptions of rightful rule. These dynamics are further evident in the rivalries among royal mothers themselves. Competition for the king's favor translated into contests over the future of the empire, with mothers advocating for their children's claims and leveraging beauty as part of their arsenal. The palace was thus a site of ongoing negotiation and conflict, where beauty shaped not only personal relationships but the fate of nations. The legacy of these mothers of kings endures in the way Persian royalty conceptualized autonomy merely as inherited power, but as a fusion of divine favor, bloodline purity, and visible charisma. Their beauty was a public asset that reinforced their sons' positions and underscored the sacred nature of their rule. In this sense, beauty became a dynasty itself, a legacy transmitted not only through genes but through the political symbolism embodied by these women. This intertwining of beauty and dynasty also complicates modern understandings of ancient Persian women. They were neither passive adornments nor mere pawns. They were central to the empire's continuity, wielding influence through the potent combination of physical allure and maternal authority. Their stories invite reconsideration of the ways gender and power operated in antiquity, revealing a nuanced portrait of agency and survival. The narratives of Casandane, Parysatis, and others also highlight the limitations imposed on women's power. Their influence was often exercised behind the scenes, circumscribed by social norms and political structures that excluded them from direct rule. Yet within these constraints, they carved out significant roles that shaped the empire's history. Beauty, in this context, was both an instrument and a symbol of their complex position. As mothers of kings, these women were the living embodiments of dynastic aspirations. Their presence at court and in ritual life continually reaffirmed the legitimacy of the ruling family. They represented continuity amid change, the human face of an empire that spanned vast territories and diverse peoples. Their beauty, cultivated and displayed, was a language of power understood by all who inhabited the Persian world. In conclusion, the phenomenon of mothers whose beauty became dynasty reflects the intricate web of aesthetics, politics, and family that underpinned Persian imperial rule. These women navigated the precarious path between decoration and authority, using their allure to secure not only personal survival but the very future of the empire. Their stories remind us that in ancient Persia, beauty was never frivolous, was foundational. While many Persian women's beauty was framed primarily as a form of ornamentation or a vehicle for dynastic continuity. There existed rare and exceptional figures who transformed this physical allure into a strategic disguise for political intellect and shrewd ambition. Their beauty became more than a static attribute. It was a mask behind which intricate calculations, long-term survival strategies, and subtle exercises of power unfolded. This phenomenon is best embodied by women like Artemisia of Caria, whose legacy challenges simplistic notions of feminine roles in the ancient world. Artemisia was queen of Halicarnassus, a Greek city-state under Persian influence, and an ally of Xerxes I during the Greco-Persian Wars. Her reputation as both a formidable naval commander and a woman of striking presence echoes through classical sources, though filtered through the biases of male historians. What makes Artemisia particularly intriguing is how she seemingly leveraged her appearance to veil a keen political mind and military prowess, defying the expectations imposed upon women as mere decorative figures. Her participation in the Battle of Salamis, where she reportedly advised Xerxes and commanded ships, is one of the few documented instances where a woman's political and military role is recognized openly in this context. Yet, behind the visible spectacle of her beauty and rank lay a complex web of diplomacy, alliance building, and survival. Artemisia's ability to navigate the perilous waters of court politics and warfare suggests that beauty was wielded as a tool not only of seduction, but of concealment, an effective mask to disarm rivals and obscure deeper intentions. The duality of her ornamental yet commanding embodies the broader theme of women in antiquity who used their appearance strategically to mask ambition. In patriarchal settings where overt power was restricted, cultivating a public image of beauty and compliance created a space for subtle influence. This allowed such women to maneuver behind the scenes, gathering intelligence, influencing decisions, and surviving perilous political tides that would have otherwise consumed less careful actors. This dynamic was not unique to Artemisia, but resonated with other women whose intellectual acumen was veiled by their physical allure. They learned to perform the expected roles of charm and submission, even as they plotted and shaped outcomes from within. In effect, beauty became a camouflage, a way to wield power without attracting overt suspicion. To the casual observer, these women were ornamental, but to those attuned to court politics, they were oracles whose insights shaped events. The mask of beauty also afforded protection. In a culture that valued appearance, women who maintained their allure could mitigate threats by projecting an image of compliance and desirability. This psychological armament discouraged direct confrontations, giving these women time and space to consolidate their positions. Their beauty served as a shield as well as a weapon, allowing them to operate in the shadows while remaining visible enough to command attention. Moreover, the use of beauty as a political disguise intersected with religious and cultural symbolism. Figures like Artemisia were often associated with divine favor or prophetic wisdom, blending aesthetic and spiritual authority. This conflation enhanced their ability to influence rulers and advisors as they occupied roles that transcended mere physicality. They became oracles in the truest sense, voices of wisdom veiled beneath the semblance of ornamentation. This strategy of masking intellect behind beauty required careful calibration. To overt an assertion of power risked backlash. To passive a posture risked irrelevance. Women who mastered this balance had to be adept at reading the moods of courts, interpreting shifting alliances, and anticipating threats. Their survival depended on a nuanced understanding of human nature and political dynamics, qualities that classical sources often underrepresented or dismissed in favor of sensationalizing their beauty. The rarity of such figures in surviving records reflects both historical biases and the genuine challenges women faced in accessing power. Yet their presence suggests that beauty and wisdom were not mutually exclusive, but could coexist in a symbiotic relationship, where beauty opened doors, wisdom ensured the wielder could navigate what lay beyond. This blending complicated traditional narratives that framed women's roles as either passive objects or overt rulers. In this context, beauty served as a form of psychological strategy, a way to influence perceptions and manage risks. It allowed women to obscure their ambitions behind socially acceptable facades, delaying or deflecting threats long enough to achieve their goals. By embodying the ideal of feminine allure, they gained trust or disarmed opponents, all while exerting subtle control over events. These women also contributed to reshaping the boundaries of female agency through their strategic use of beauty. As a mask, they expanded the possibilities of influence in restrictive environments. Their examples challenge modern assumptions about gender and power in antiquity, revealing a spectrum of roles that included covert leadership and intellectual command. Cloaked in physical charm, the legacy of such figures resonates beyond their immediate historical contexts. They demonstrate how marginalized actors develop adaptive strategies that transform limitations into opportunities. Their stories reveal a sophisticated understanding of power as performance and perception, where controlling how one is seen becomes as crucial as controlling what one does. Artemisia's life thus offers a window into a broader phenomenon: transformation of beauty from mere adornment to an active tool of political survival and control. Her story urges reconsideration of the ways in which physical appearance and intellectual agency intersected in ancient empires, highlighting the complexity of women's roles that history often obscures. As we reflect on these rare examples, it becomes clear that beauty was not a static or superficial trait, but a dynamic element in the politics of survival. For women like Artemisia, it was a mask that concealed wisdom, a weapon that wielded influence, and a shield that protected from the dangers lurking within imperial courts. This interplay of appearance and intellect shaped not only individual destinies, but the broader contours of power in the ancient world. In the sprawling imperial tapestry woven by Darius I and his successors, the daughters and wives of the king occupied roles fraught with peril and expectation. These royal women were not merely ornamental figures of beauty, they embodied the empire's diplomatic ambitions and internal tensions. Their physical allure was a double-edged sword, granting them visibility and influence, but also exposing them to profound vulnerabilities. To be visibly beautiful in the corridors of power was to become a living symbol of the empire's reach and a frequent target in the dangerous game of politics and alliance. Darius I, who solidified the Achaemenid Empire's foundations, understood the strategic value of his family's beauty and status. His daughters were often married off in carefully orchestrated alliances designed to bind powerful families and subdued territories more closely to the imperial center. These marriages were less about personal choice and more about securing loyalty and preventing rebellion. The beauty of these women was not incidental but instrumental, enhancing the appeal of these unions and thus the strength of the empire's web. Yet, this visibility came at a cost. Royal daughters were pawns in a game where their physical presence functioned as both a diplomatic gift and a political tool. Being visibly beautiful made them objects of desire not only for allies but also for enemies. Their allure could inspire admiration, but it also invited threats, kidnapping, coercion, or even assassination attempts. In a court rife with intrigue, where succession was often contested and loyalties fragile, the fate of these women was precarious. Forced unions were a common reality. Royal women found themselves betrothed or married to men whose loyalty to the throne was suspect or whose ambitions intersected dangerously with their own families. These marriages sometimes sowed seeds of future conflict, as husbands used their marital ties to advance personal agendas, while women struggled to protect their own and their children's interests. The tension between political alliance and personal survival was a constant undercurrent. The daughters of Darius and his successors were expected to embody the ideal Persian woman, graceful, obedient, and loyal, while simultaneously navigating a labyrinth of power dynamics that demanded intelligence, resilience, and adaptability. Their beauty was scrutinized and often politicized, becoming a marker by which they were judged, controlled, or feared. Physical appearance was thus inseparable from political identity. Historical accounts hint at the fragility of their position. Some royal women, despite their elevated status, fell victim to palace coups or factional rivalries. Their beauty, once an asset, became a liability as it provoked jealousy or suspicion. The desire to control or eliminate these women to weaken their familial influence was a recurring theme in imperial history. In some cases, accusations of infidelity or conspiracy served as pretexts for their removal or worse. Marriage alliances also extended beyond Persia's borders, drawing royal women into the complex interplay of imperial diplomacy. Daughters married into powerful families within the vast Achaemenid territories, or to client kings in far-flung regions. These unions were meant to cement Persian authority, but also place the women at the crossroads of cultural exchange and political tension. Adapting to foreign courts, customs, and expectations added layers of challenge to their already fraught existence. Their lives were often marked by isolation and surveillance. The Persian court maintained strict control over royal women's movements and interactions, both to protect their virtue and to prevent espionage or rebellion. Eunuchs and guards monitored them closely, a constant reminder of the thin line between honor and danger. In this confined world, beauty became a form of currency, but also a burden, magnifying their visibility and the risks it entailed. The psychological toll of such conditions was profound. Royal daughters and wives lived with the ever-present threat of betrayal, exile, or death. Their roles demanded composure and dignity amid uncertainty and fear. Maintaining beauty was not merely an aesthetic choice, but a political necessity, a way to sustain influence and command respect in a hostile environment. Their physical presence was a statement of power and survival. These challenges did not preclude agency. Some royal women skillfully used their beauty and position to build alliances, influence policy, or protect their progeny. They were adept at navigating the treacherous waters of court politics, employing charm, intelligence, and sometimes ruthlessness to secure their status. However, their success was always contingent on the volatile favor of kings, eunuchs, and courtiers. The fate of Darius's daughters and successors' wives exemplifies the paradox of beauty in imperial contexts. It conferred prestige and power, but exacted a high price. Their stories reveal how the Achaemenid court was a place where personal and political realms were inseparable, and where women's bodies were both symbols and battlegrounds of empire. Through these women, the burdens and vulnerabilities of royal beauty become starkly visible. Their experiences illustrate the complex interplay of gender, power, and diplomacy in one of history's greatest empires. The political use of their beauty shaped not only their destinies, but also the broader imperial legacy. The notion of beauty as both a blessing and a burden, deeply ingrained in the Achaemenid imperial period, left a lasting imprint on the cultural fabric of Persia that extended well into later eras, including the Islamic period. The association between feminine beauty and risk that, to be too visible was to invite danger, shame, or death, became a defining motif in the evolving social codes governing women's behavior. Central to this legacy was the adoption and adaptation of the veil, which took on meanings far beyond modesty or religious observance. It emerged as a vital instrument of social protection, a shield against the deadly consequences of female visibility that ancient precedents had established. In the complex world of ancient Persia, as previously discussed, visibility for women, particularly those deemed beautiful, was a precarious condition. The court's obsession with beauty often led to lethal rivalries, political manipulations, and silencing. Over time, this historical memory shaped collective attitudes toward female appearance and presence, embedding a deep caution into the cultural psyche. The veil thus became a physical manifestation of this caution, a tangible response to the persistent threats that beauty posed. While veiling practices existed in various forms throughout the ancient Near East, in Persia they acquired a distinctive social and political significance rooted in the legacy of imperial court dynamics. Far from being merely an expression of modesty or religious requirement, the veil functioned as a mechanism of concealment designed to mitigate the hazards of excessive female exposure. By limiting visibility, it reduced the risks of unwanted attention from powerful men, jealous rivals, or political enemies who might seek to exploit beauty for personal or factional gain. The veil's role as social protection is illuminated by accounts from both Persian and later Islamic texts, which frame female concealment as a safeguard against violence, shame, and social disruption. This framing reflects the understanding that to be seen was to be vulnerable, especially in contexts where women's bodies were politicized and sexualized. In this way, the veil became a tool to navigate the tension between the cultural valorization of beauty and the dangers it engendered. The adoption of veiling in the Islamic era did not represent a complete cultural rupture, but rather an adaptation and continuation of existing Persian social practices infused with new religious interpretations. Islamic teachings on modesty and gender segregation found resonance with older Persian customs that had long emphasized female concealment as a means of survival. The veil's symbolic weight thus expanded, embodying not only spiritual piety, but also a historical consciousness of female vulnerability within patriarchal systems. Importantly, veiling also imposed a form of silence, social and political, that echoed the silencing of women whose beauty once wielded power but eventually provoked erasure. The veil physically marked the boundary between presence and absence, visibility and invisibility. It allowed women to remain within social and familial structures, while simultaneously limiting their public agency. This paradoxical position of being both present and hidden underscored the enduring tension between female power and societal control. The cultural memory embedded in veiling also influenced gender relations and social expectations. Women's modesty was rigorously enforced as a form of protection, not only from external threats, but from internal family and community dynamics. Maintaining the veil signaled adherence to social norms designed to preserve honor and prevent scandal, which, if breached, could have deadly consequences for women and their families. Thus, shame became a potent social sanction, reinforcing the necessity of concealment. This legacy of associating female beauty with danger and shame is visible in Persian literature, poetry, and visual art throughout the centuries. Veiled women appear as both mysterious and vulnerable figures, their partial concealment evoking the dual themes of protection and restriction. Poets lament the perils of beauty, while painters illustrate the delicate balance between allure and invisibility. These artistic expressions serve as cultural commentaries on the complex role that female appearance played in societal dynamics. The veil's significance also varied according to social status, geography, and historical period. Among urban elites and royal families, elaborate veiling and seclusion practices reflected the high stakes of political visibility. For women of lower classes or in rural areas, the veil's function could be more pragmatic, serving as protection against everyday dangers or as a marker of modesty without necessarily implying political calculation. Nonetheless, the overarching theme of concealment as safety persisted. Veiling intersected with other social institutions designed to regulate female presence such as purdah, the segregation of women, restrictions on mobility, and gendered codes of speech and behavior. Together, these practices created a tightly controlled environment where beauty's potential threats were managed through layers of physical and social barriers. The cultural memory of deadly beauty, as inherited from imperial Persia, provided a framework within which these measures were understood and enforced. This history also reveals the ambivalence of Persian society toward female beauty and power. On one hand, beauty was celebrated as an ideal, a gift linked to divine favor and royal legitimacy. On the other, it was feared as a source of disruption and danger. The veil crystallized this ambivalence, embodying both reverence and restraint, admiration and fear. Such complexity complicates modern interpretations of veiling, which often reduce it to simplistic notions of oppression or modesty. The Persian experience shows that veiling emerged from a layered history of gendered power, relations, political necessity, and cultural memory. It was simultaneously a strategy of survival, a social expectation, and a symbolic act embedded with centuries of meaning about beauty's risks. The continuation of this legacy into Islamic Persia also affected how women's voices were heard or silenced in public and private spheres. The veil's physical barrier often translated into restrictions on women's participation in political life, education, and social discourse. Yet, within these constraints, women found ways to exert influence, drawing on networks of family, religion, and culture. Their silenced beauty, paradoxically, could become a source of strength and resilience. The memory of beauty's deadly consequences thus shaped not only physical practices like veiling, but also broader cultural narratives about women's roles, rights, and identities. It became a persistent theme in how Persian society conceptualized gender and power, informing attitudes that endured across centuries and political regimes. In examining this legacy, it becomes evident that the veil was never a simple garment, but a complex symbol deeply rooted in historical experiences of risk and protection. It reflects how societies grapple with the tension between celebrating feminine beauty and controlling its potential to unsettle established orders. This tension is not unique to Persia, but resonates globally, revealing universal themes of visibility, vulnerability, and the social construction of gender. The Persian case, however, offers a particularly rich illustration of how historical memory and imperial politics can shape cultural practices that endure and evolve, influencing notions of beauty, shame, and silence. As we trace this legacy, the veil emerges as a powerful reminder that beauty, far from being an uncomplicated asset, has long carried the weight of risk and repression. It challenges modern readers to recognize the layered histories embedded in cultural symbols and to appreciate the resilience of women who navigated these fraught terrains of visibility and silence. Throughout the unfolding history of ancient Persia, beauty revealed itself as a paradoxical force, an exquisite gift wrapped in peril. It was a currency of power and influence, but equally a trap that ensnared those who wielded it too visibly or too well. This dual nature resonates through the stories of Persian queens, concubines, and noblewomen who navigated a world where their physical allure could open doors to empire and simultaneously push them toward ruin. In this concluding reflection, the intricate dance between beauty's reverence and its feared potency comes sharply into focus, prompting us to reconsider what survival meant within the imperial shadow. The Persian Empire, vast and complex, was as much a stage for political theater as it was a dominion of military might. Within this theater, beauty operated as a script written by power, gender, and cultural anxieties. The rulers and courtiers who prized physical allure also lived in dread of the instability it could incite. The tension between celebrating beauty as a symbol of divine favor and fearing it as a source of political upheaval is a defining feature of Persian imperial dynamics. Figures such as Casandane and Parysatis exemplify how beauty could translate into dynastic strength, underpinning the legitimacy of kings and the stability of succession. Their lives illustrate the reverence accorded to women whose physical presence was intertwined with sacred bloodlines and the future of the empire. Yet even this reverence was fragile, contingent on shifting court alliances and the precarious favor of rulers. The same beauty that elevated could quickly become a liability, exposing women to the dangers of jealousy, rivalry, and political retribution. The stories of Vashti and Esther, both celebrated and punished for their beauty in biblical texts, encapsulate this ambivalence. They stand as symbolic figures through whom we glimpse the deadly stakes of allure, the power to command kings and influence nations, but also the peril of falling out of favor or challenging patriarchal norms. Their narratives remind us that beauty's power was inseparable from the gendered frameworks that sought to contain or exploit it. Similarly, the Greek portrayals of Persian women, shaped by Orientalist fantasies and political rivalries, reveal how beauty was weaponized in cross-cultural discourses. To the Greeks, Persian women embodied both fascination and fear, serving as embodiments of the exotic other whose seductive power masked dangerous ambitions. These depictions, while biased, underscore the broader theme of beauty as a contested and destabilizing force. The role of eunuchs and court manipulators further complicated the equation, turning beauty into political currency that could be bought, sold, or destroyed. Men like Bagos wielded enormous influence by controlling access to beautiful women, exemplifying how beauty became enmeshed in the ruthless mechanics of power. The fate of these women often rested in hands that saw them as pawns rather than persons, their worth measured by the sway their beauty could command or the intrigue it could inspire. At the same time, rare figures such as Artemisia of Caria demonstrate how beauty could serve as a mask for intellect and agency, allowing women to transcend their ornamental roles and participate actively in the empire's governance and warfare. These exceptional cases challenge reductive stereotypes, revealing the multifaceted ways in which beauty intersected with survival, strategy, and political cunning. The enduring legacy of beauty's dangerous allure extended beyond the Achaemenid period, shaping cultural practices such as veiling and female seclusion in later Persian and Islamic societies. The veil, far from a simple symbol of modesty, emerges as a protective response to the historical memory of beauty's risks and attempt to shield women from the consequences of visibility. This continuation of concealment and silence underscores how deeply ingrained the fear of beauty's power became in Persian cultural consciousness. When we consider the daughters and wives of Darius I and his successors, the burden of beauty is laid bare. Their lives were shaped by the demands of diplomacy and alliance, but also by the perils of exposure. Their visibility made them targets in a world where marriage could be both a political weapon and a personal trap. The delicate balance they maintained between ornament and agency speaks to the profound costs beauty exacted within imperial frameworks. Reflecting on these threads together, a pattern emerges, one of beauty as a double-edged sword. It was a source of prestige and leverage, but also of fear and destruction. The Persian Empire revered beauty insofar as it reinforced order, legitimacy, and divine favor. Yet it feared beauty's capacity to disrupt, to inspire jealousy, and to enable subversion. This ambivalence permeated court life, diplomacy, and cultural norms, shaping the experiences of women who were both venerated and condemned. The question arises, did the Persian Empire fear beauty more than it revered it? The evidence suggests that fear often tempered reverence. The extensive use of surveillance, eunuchs, veiling, and political manipulation all point to a regime cautious of the destabilizing potential that beauty embodied. The silencing and disappearance of beautiful women from historical records, along with the lethal intrigues surrounding them, further attest to this anxiety. Yet within this tension lay the possibility of power. Women who could master the precarious balance between visibility and concealment, allure and control, survived and sometimes thrived. Their stories reveal the intricate dynamics of gender and authority, highlighting how survival in imperial Persia demanded not only beauty but cunning, resilience, and adaptability. This conclusion invites us to rethink broader notions of power and gender in antiquity. It challenges simplistic binaries that cast women as either passive victims or sovereign rulers. Instead, it reveals a spectrum of experience shaped by the interplay of appearance, social expectations, and political realities. The legacy of beauty in ancient Persia is one of complexity, where allure was both weapon and vulnerability, where silence could be punishment or protection, and where survival required navigating a perilous, beautiful labyrinth in the end. The echoes of these beautiful condemned women resonate across time, reminding us that power is often entangled with risk, and that the history of beauty is inseparable from the history of human struggle for agency. Their lives, partially lost to silence and shadow, continue to speak through the layers of history, urging us to listen closely to the fragile and potent forces that shaped their world and ours.